Hello, welcome to the final session of today's Digital Building Summit. I'm really excited to be chairing this one. My name's Jordan Marshall and I'm Special Projects Editor at Assemble Media Group. So the topic for this session is how can digital construction support the retrofit agenda? We have a really great panel for you today. We have Rachel Bell, Digital Product Development Lead at Atkins, Lee Stokes, Sustainability Operations Director at Mace, and Michelle Tort, Senior Strategic Sustainability Lead at Talana. A couple of housekeeping things from me to kick things off. Please send through your questions at any time. We'll try and get as many of those answered by our panel as we can. We're obviously keen to have our audience get involved, so please send those through. Also, yes, this session will be available on demand after it finishes via the same link you've joined today. Just give us half an hour after the session ends for everything to process and load, and please feel free to disseminate that link more widely. It'll be available for 12 months. That's about it. Each of our presenters is going to give a presentation on the topic to kick things off. And first up is Michelle. So Michelle, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thanks. Okay. It's not letting me share my screen, I'm afraid. So I might need to rejoin.
Oh, it was working just before. So if you just hit the start, so it won't let you click it at all?
No.
Okay. Sure. Lee, would you mind?
No, there we go. No, right now. Great.
Bro, thank you. You can see that perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. Sorry about that. So great to be here, and I'm really excited to be talking about such an important issue. So my name is Michelle. I am the Senior Strategic Sustainability Lead at Talana. Talana is a climate technology company for the built environment. And we manage the risk interface between energy infrastructure and finance. Essentially, we use software to run risk analytics on retrofit projects. And this risk analytics is integrated into the underwriting criteria of an insurer. And this insurance policy enables the raising of private finance in order to scale retrofits. We are backed by the technology provider ABB and by global insurer AmTrust Financial Services. Over the next 10 minutes, I'm going to be running through what the retrofit agenda is, how software can support it, and a live example of scaling retrofits in action. So I'm sure if you're listening to this panel, I'm preaching to the choir about why retrofits are important and what they are. But to make sure we're aligned, firstly, retrofits are defined as introducing a new technology or system into an old one. So for the purposes of this, in the built environment, it's making a building more energy efficient or introducing an energy generation or storage or electrification asset. Now, retrofits are vital for three key reasons: the scale of the climate crisis, the UN, the IPCC, the Climate Change Sustainability Committee are all unanimous that we're not doing enough, and we need to act fast. There's also the economic side. As I'm sure many of you will have seen, energy bills have been spiraling, and as a result, fuel poverty has soared in the UK, currently standing at around 6.7 million households. And finally, the social element. Cold homes cost the NHS 2.5 billion a year, as well as obviously the impact on people's mental health and well-being. So if retrofits are so important, what is the plan? What is the plan to scale? So the title of this panel is about the retrofit agenda. So I think it's important to reflect on what that agenda is and who that agenda comes from. So these are a few different plans for scaling retrofits and a few different drivers. So legislative from the government, what the industry says we need to do to avert climate disaster, and what individual organizations are doing. I think what's quite clear is there isn't a consensus at the moment about what needs to be done for retrofits. There is no consensus about what a standardized retrofit looks like, and there's no consensus about how we can reach scale, and there needs to be. And I'll be talking about how software can enable this standardization and scale. So just very quickly, this is a snapshot view of some headlines over the past 18 months, hopefully highlighting how fast we need to move. So the way Tanana looks at it is we have a software platform that analyzes the technical and financial viability of retrofits. We quantify the carbon and bill savings, and we run risk analytics on the retrofits. This connects to an energy savings insurance policy, which guarantees project outputs. And in turn, this enables the raising of private finance to bring the funding gap. All of this is underpinned by software. And what that does is it standardizes the process of getting from an engineering project on one side to money on the other. And that standardization is vital because it standardizes the risk profile for the building owner, for the person who lives there. So, for example, Talana works a lot with the social housing sector. So it's about providing confidence to registered landlords, to their tenants, and finally to the funder to actually access at-scale finance. So I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper look into how software can do this. So our platform aligns what works from an engineering perspective with a finance perspective. So we take whatever data a building owner or registered social landlord has, and we enhance it with an inference engine and meta models. What this means is that where there are data gaps, we can make intelligent inferences in order to start someone on that journey to retrofit. And this is vital because at the moment, there's this narrative that you need all the perfect data, you need to have done millions of surveys, millions of you need to have all the data points before you can even begin. And that's creating paralysis and inertia in the market. So what we try to do is we meet people where they are, and then we add data once we know a project is financially viable, and we can refine that data and refine that information until we can have a really tight business case for projects. We then account for uncertainty in retrofits. So once we've got all the data, added the inferences, we have a digital twin. We overlay this with retrofit scenarios, and then we analyze the performance uncertainty of these scenarios. So essentially, we quantify the likelihood and magnitude of underperformance. This connects to insurance and is integrated with the underwriting criteria of an A-rated insurer. This is a data-driven process, and that's vital because it provides confidence that if something goes wrong, the insurance will pay out. So what the insurance does is it guarantees the energy savings of a project. So on the right, you can see this graphic. So all of the energy savings there are insured. So if there is a shortfall, then the insurance will pay out. And that also covers the cost of repair and replacement. An insurance policy acts as collateral for a finance provider, and it basically is something you can point to say, look, these savings are absolutely tangible and they're going to come through. And that is what is needed to bring private finance into the sector. So this policy was co-created by ourselves and our partner and our backer, Amtrust, and is the only kind of policy in the market to do this. So the insurance policy finances the savings on the bill. This enables long maturity private finance to come in. So on social housing projects, it can cover up to 70% of the cost of a project, which is then repaid using the savings. So the savings are both the way that private finance is raised and the mechanism to repay it. This supports off-balance sheet treatment, which essentially means that borrowing this private finance won't impact existing borrowing commitments. which is quite key because a lot of landlords have maxed out on their senior debt capacity. So they've borrowed all they can against the value of their buildings. So they need another financial structure, which is what sort of software at the very beginning helps with. And this helps with resident impact. We ensure that there's a day one bill savings for residents to help address and mitigate fuel poverty. And I think it's quite key to emphasize, the sort of financial affordability for residents and for homeowners on the bills, and make sure that is achieved through retrofits. At the very beginning, I talked about the environmental, economic, and social impact of relevant retrofits. And at every stage, we need to remember who we're doing a retrofit for. Yes, it's for the planet, but it's also for the people who live in those buildings. And we need to make sure that they have a material impact, a material benefit from these projects. And lastly, as a requirement of the insurance policy, all the projects are metered and monitored to verify the savings. So if something does go wrong, the insurance policy can pay out immediately. Essentially, it means that there'll be a claim settlement without loss adjustment because there is all the data on the performance of the building. So this is a example project that we're working on at the moment with a social housing provider. They came to us with 30,000 properties and said, we know which properties we want to focus on, help us make it financeable. So we we broke their portfolio into batches, and this is the first batch of 3,500 homes. And through using software to standardize the retrofit process, we are helping them raise private finance to cover 71% of the costs. We're ensuring that residents will get a day one bill saving of £300. And we're taking this phased approach of solar and storage first, deeper fabric, and electrification second. This is the case that is the most financeable and will have the greatest impact on residents. And it's all about balancing environmental impact with also resident impact. So thank you so much for listening. I just wanted to end with saying there's a huge challenge ahead of us to scale retrofits and standardize them, and it's urgent that we do this. However, I think software has a huge role to play in standardizing retrofits and scaling them so we can mitigate the worst effects of the climate crisis and support vulnerable residents. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was such a great way to kick off. If you just hit the stop sharing, you'll be back. That's perfect. Lee, I'll hand over to you next, if that's okay, and we'll hear from you. But Michelle, thank you so much. That was such an insightful presentation.
Thank you.
Of course. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I was going to start off. Thank you for having me today. It was a very interesting talk from Michelle, actually, a lot of synergies with what I'm going to talk about, but very quickly I'll talk about me. So I've been in sustainability for 15 years, and I've been lucky enough to work on lots of really good projects where I was able to save carbon. Today I work for Mace, which is a large construction and consultancy business. I work in the global responsible business team, and I have a wide remit that allows me to save carbon for our clients, both in the UK, in my public sector hat, and also globally in the Middle East and Africa regions. So I also thought it was important to talk about why would a big construction company like Mace be interested in retrofit. But as you probably all know, and I'm probably teaching my grandma to suck eggs from everyone on the call, but most of the buildings we have by 2050 are already built today. So about 80% of the buildings that will be lived in and worked in by 2050 exist today, which means we only have 20% of them where we can construct them to a new net zero build standard, meaning we have a massive problem for retrofit. So about £350 billion worth of spend will be required to get the UK's building stock to a near net zero or net zero standard over the next few years. the big issue we have is that is a significant ramp up in the work we're doing today. So we do not have enough people, we do not have enough skills, and we do not have enough practitioners all around to do this work. So my view, and I think everyone on this call's view, is that we need to heavily lean into digital to allow us to bridge that skills gap and resource gap that we are going to have. So how do we do it in construction, and what can retrofit learn from the construction side? So what should we replicate in the existing buildings? So I pulled out 3 themes that I think we should focus on. But on the left-hand side there, you will see a very early digital BIM model. So it's a concept model, so early on in the process. And listed around that model is all the sort of things we know that we have to do. So this model is a domestic model, so very similar to the models we saw before. So we know that we have to do strong fabric and really tight tightness. We know that we have to put in solar power. We know we have to decarbonize the heat. We know we have to electrify transport, but also we have to work with nature. So, you know, how do we use nature around us to reduce consumption and also increase and promote well-being in the occupants? So that model on the left-hand side is roughly what we do, but how we do it in digital is we lean very heavily into digital building design. So starting with a BIM model, all projects now, I would say, in the construction industry start with a BIM model. So we have a digital footprint of the building. We then work with the operations elements to bring all of the elements from the operation of the building back into the BIM model and create a digital twin. So in retrofit, there is, I nearly said none, very little, let's say, digital information about a building. So we need to work in retrofit to create some sort of digital design, digital footprint. Now you can retrofit IoT sensors in smart buildings. So that is one of the first things we should do. Once we have that digital baseline for a building, then we are able to use data analytics and machine learning or AI, whatever is applicable, to manage that building. So that may be managing the wasted energy that we see in that building and reducing that, or it may be providing circular economy techniques by making sure things are only maintained or repaired when it is optimal, keep things in production for longer so they're not going to landfill. And then finally, the thing we do in construction a lot is we try to take a whole life cost and carbon view of a building. So it's very easy when retrofitting or making any change to a building to go for the cheaper option. But the way we like to approach it is to look at the whole life cost of the change all the way through its life cycle. So how many times you're going to have to repair it or move it or change it, and also what the carbon impact of that is. So that allows us to take a considered approach that doesn't build a cheap-ish or cheaper solution today, but lead us into carbon nightmares in the future. And then finally, if you believe the Climate Change Committee in the UK to get all sectors to net zero is going to be somewhere over £1 trillion from now to 2050, which is just a ridiculously huge amount of money. But I think because of that, it's a moment for us to take stock and think about what legacy we're going to leave behind. So obviously we want to leave a legacy of improved health, significant growth, protect our food while also securing the environment, and ultimately maintain our way of life and political stability. But I think we need to, at this point, have a real strategy and consensus in the industry about how we weave a golden thread of digital through that transformation, because this is a ginormous, once in a lifetime transformation with a lot of money being spent on it. And I think it would be remiss of us not to think about what sort of legacy we want to leave behind. So that is the end of my slides.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lee. Another great presentation, another great viewpoint. Really appreciate it. Rachel, let's hear from you before we get into the Q&A. Just a reminder, and plenty of you already are, but if anybody has any questions, please send those through and we'll try and get as many of those answered in the Q&A as possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I don't have any slides, so I'm just going to talk. Thank you very much, and I really enjoyed the two first presentations. My name is Rachel Bell, and I sit within the Global Engineering Net Zero team at Atkins as the Digital Product Development Lead. In our team, we cover all aspects of low to zero carbon engineering solutions, from new build through to existing assets, and from buildings through to large infrastructure projects. And my role within the team is to look at bringing together existing services that our practice deliver around energy and carbon, and look for opportunities to automate and to improve this through technology, whether that be tools that are available on the market or where there might be a gap in the market to then develop bespoke solutions in-house. One of our main focuses, and particularly my key focus in the last 2 years, has been the development of decarbonomics, which is Atkins' data-driven solution to decarbonising existing assets cost effectively. And within that, our initial focus was on the decarbonisation or on the retrofit of existing buildings, which closely links to the topic of today's panel discussion. And then the reason that we focused on this, as I imagine everyone in the call is aware, is because of the challenge of the retrofit agenda. And to echo Lee, the very familiar statistic that 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 already exist. And so we really focused on what can be done to tackle this challenge. A key aspect of this was using digital solutions and data effectively. And so applying digital solutions in a really targeted way and looking for opportunities, for example, to automate manual calculations or manual processes was one of my main focuses. As the more that we automate these repetitive tasks, the more we can then effectively prioritise our engineers, our carbon experts, our cost experts' time on projects where their expertise is really needed. The decarbonomics approach is a 3-step process, and I'm going to just quickly outline the 3 steps and then go into detail about how we've applied data and digital processes to support the steps. So the first step is benchmark, where we calculate the baseline carbon in a building portfolio. The second is roadmap, where we then scenario test interventions and output a bespoke optimized roadmap for a building portfolio. And then the final step is deliver, where we turn this roadmap into actual on-site solutions. In the benchmark stage, we collect available data from a building portfolio and do targeted building surveys. Where there are data gaps, we then use data science to augment data from similar buildings within the portfolio to fill those gaps. And where there aren't similar buildings within the portfolio, we use a library of benchmarks for representative building typologies. And the intention of this is to build a complete picture of the estimate of the carbon baseline within an estate without having to survey every single building at this stage, which then enables decisions to be made more quickly. The buildings that we do go on site and survey, we've automated the data collection process as much as possible by using bespoke forms on an app, which are then uploaded directly to our databases. The QA process within this is also automated to then reduce human error and reduce manual aspects of the survey process wherever possible. In the roadmap stage, we've developed calculations to calculate the cost, carbon, and energy savings of standard retrofit interventions that you would apply on most buildings, which are then compared on a cost per tonne of carbon saved basis to select the best solution for particular buildings. Automating these repetitive calculations, as I mentioned before, then frees up our engineers' time to focus on the more innovative and bespoke solutions for particular buildings. Once we have the outputs from these calculations, we then use machine learning and algorithms to test multiple scenarios and produce an optimized roadmap to net zero based on a number of client-specific constraints, which again removes a lot of the manual steps in producing a net zero roadmap. In the final stage in deliver, we use a digital program management software to ensure that delivery data is being collected in a consistent way and to make sure that the actual carbon and energy savings are being captured and then fed back in to improve the benchmark library. So it's a circular process that's constantly improving. And then one of the biggest parts of all of this is making sure that we then visualize this on dashboards in an effective way to make this carbon visible, to enable clients to make intelligent decisions about where to start on their retrofit journey. So to summarise, these are some of the ways that we can leverage digital solutions to support the retrofit of existing buildings. It's obviously not an exhaustive list, and I'm really looking forward to the panel discussion.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was another great introduction. Could I ask all of our speakers just to pop their cameras back on? I think we're just, yeah, wonderful. And we'll jump into the Q&A because I've got a couple of my own, and the benefit of being chair is that I get to ask my own first. But I promise I will get to the audience questions in just a minute. One of the questions I definitely did want to ask, and you've all sort of touched on this and from different methods, but like, are there specific things and tools that people should be using to help make the right retrofit decisions from the outset of this? Like when they're like, okay, here's this project that I want to make it a retrofit project. How do they go about knowing the best approach for that scheme? Because obviously there are different ways you can tackle it, different parts of the building that you can retrofit, different services and that sort of thing. Are there any key steps you think people should be taking in the first instance?
Who's it to? Anyone?
Anyone who wants to go, I'm happy. I don't want to pick on anybody, so anybody who wants to jump in is fine.
Sorry, so I'm guessing Rachel will say sustain analytics is the right tool to use, right? Sorry, your tool, Rachel. I guess you would say that's your tool.
Yeah, I think everyone should use decarbonomics. No, I think it really depends on dependent on the client, where you are in your retrofit journey, what the data that you've got available is. I think that then depends on kind of your next steps, because I think if you have a really good set of data on an estate, if you really know where you are in time, that means you can kind of enter the process at one stage. Whereas if you're at a point where you kind of don't know anything about the assets that you own, then you obviously need to start at a different step.
Yeah, so I like what Rachel says. So I think in retrofit buildings, like was in my slide pack, the data is poor, super poor. So often the first step is non-digital. The first step is audit, walk around the site with an energy manager, work out what's there, look at the data gaps. So I think in most of retrofit where we stand today, the first step is non-digital, which is boots on the ground audit, which is a shame. I believe the second step should be some digital representation of the building, and so that you can then start making digital decisions.
If I can jump in, I think I absolutely echo Lee's point that the data we have on buildings at the moment isn't good enough, and I think everyone would recognise that EPCs, while a industry standard and while they are recognised and understood, are fairly inadequate to actually address the challenge and to give us enough data about what needs to be done. However, certainly in the social housing sector, most landlords do already have EPCs, and so I think it's about using what you've got as a first stage for us. So we try and enhance whatever data someone has with AI and then refine it once you know it's financeable. And I think from our perspective, it's about, you have to start somewhere. And if you're starting with boots on the ground surveys, that's incredibly time and cost intensive. We rather see it as using digital solutions as a first stage, and then enhancing whatever those digital solutions are with refined data as you go along. So firstly, using the data you have, EPC or other, then adding in, once you have narrowed down a project and what might be able to be financed, then you add in surveys, then you add in build data, etc.
Brilliant. Okay, I think that covers off that first question. The next one I'm going to jump to is just on, we've had this one come through from our audience. So a key challenge that remains in certain sectors is the lack of interoperability of software and systems and technology. Is there, like, open protocol is best practice, but are organizations ready to do that? Do we have the level of like openness within construction that will allow all this great stuff that you guys are talking about to actually start progressing this agenda?
So no is the short answer. We don't. So there's two ways you can approach it. So you can either collect as much data that's openly available and then transform that and use that in your systems. And that's generally the approach we go. So we try to capture onboard analytics by an IoT device that takes that analytics and transports it back to our data hub, and then we transform and integrate that data into our existing data sets. But the short answer is no. Probably the best source of data in any building is the building management system, but again, it's very difficult to get that data out. The data is being put in by engineers over a long period of time manually. The data is all labeled and tagged by people manually, so there's no standardization. Newer pieces of equipment that are coming out, like I say, generally have onboard analytics, but often they're in closed loop ecosystems. So it is a big problem. I think time will fix this. Humans are very good at reacting to a crisis rather than planning ahead. So I think as we go forward, and I've certainly seen it in the sustainability world, that the sustainability people are banding together, working together, being a lot more open about what we're doing. So I think the short answer is no, it's not good enough. The long answer is I think we will have to get better. Elon Musk said, if I'm in a boat and it's sinking and I've got a patent for a bucket, then really I should share that bucket around, right? And I echo his feeling. We're in a boat and we're sinking. Let's share the bucket.
I absolutely agree that there needs to be more data sharing. I think that is beginning to happen. So we're kind of aware of certain kind of projects through Innovate UK and other kind of, I guess, accelerator programs for innovation where they are looking at data sharing of building data. However, what I would say is I think the market for retrofits and the industry as a whole is still relatively new. And it will be a case of the market maturing and time. But I think we're beginning to move in the right direction. There's recently been a project done in the social housing sector that has brought together several local authorities, some consultancies, some construction companies, some digital services companies, and they've been very open within that group of about 14 people about the challenges they're facing, and that they're beginning to consolidate the reports of that knowledge share and publicize that. So I think that will have a big impact on that kind of data sharing point.
Absolutely. Rachel, we were just sort of discussing whether there is enough of a culture in the sector to support this open sharing of data that's so key to this sort of discussion, and where you think the sector's at and whether it needs to progress or what levers could help drive that sort of progression that's needed. If you had any thoughts.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think knowledge sharing is absolutely key, because we've all got the same challenge that we need to solve together. But obviously, there is a kind of an attitude within the industry, or a bit of a resistance against kind of that sharing. So I think there is still a way to go before we get to a point where everything is open source. We can all learn from kind of the work that everybody else has done to really tackle this challenge together.
Actually, if you don't mind me just kind of jumping in, Rachel kind of reminded me of something, and that's at the moment, a lot of the sector are seeing retrofits and addressing the retrofit challenge as a competitive thing, and we're all competing against each other for the same clients. But actually, those figures that Lee had in his presentation of over $1 trillion is needed to get the UK to net zero. It doesn't need to be competitive. Organizations don't need to be competitive because there is so much that needs to be done that actually, by collaborating and working together, we can address far more of the challenge from a sort of environmental and social sustainability perspective, but also that can help our own businesses to grow. And if we take it from that starting point of there's so much to be done, if we waste time competing, not only will we not get the challenge done, but for the climate, but we won't be able to complete our own projects. That's kind of the change that needs to begin to happen in the industry.
Yeah,
and I think, yeah.
Sorry.
Go for it,
No,
Lee.
I just wanted to come in on both your points. I completely agree with you, right? £1 trillion is a lot to go around, so there's definitely room for collaboration. I think, Michelle, you called out the work Innovate UK are doing. So I was previously involved in the MedApps, it's called, so modernising data energy applications. Brilliant program, but again, small seeds that we're seeing grow. So I think over time, I think both them comments from Rachel and Michelle are spot on. We need to collaborate and we need solid data.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So I've got some more questions. I'll try and cover off a few more. We've had a couple of different questions coming in about the role on-site building surveys will play within this discussion, and how significant they are and how much they will still, there's obviously still be a human element for that fact, and sort of how you guys see that all fit in together. Did anyone have any particular thoughts on that in the first instance?
So maybe I'll speak first because I'm the odd man out. So I think we can still build a business case pretty solidly, and we do for large, if we're running a program like how do you get London to net zero or a big region to net zero, we obviously start from a desktop point of view, right? And you can get a fairly reasonable and robust business case using publicly and privately available benchmarks and business data sources to get to net zero. But I in my heart of hearts, I don't think there is a digital solution once you get to a certain level. I think we're working on them. So I was working on a heat pump, AI-based heat pump design program, heat network design program for 5th generation heat networks. So I think in time, AI will come and will fill the gap. But right now, if somebody is going out to get a detailed 100% accurate cost, somebody's going to have to go to site and have a look around.
Absolutely. So we've had another question sort of coming in about the role government policy is going to end up playing in all of this, and whether we need a national something that's been discussed, I know, by the CLC and others, is the idea of a national retrofit policy. So there's two different questions, so I'm going to try to amalgamate them so we can cover them off all together. So there's sort of been a question around how if the government is focusing on, retrofit of certain aspects, like there's been the insulation stuff, how are we sure what we're doing is actually best, or are we just doing what's being specifically prescribed by government at that time? And then also, do we need a more holistic nationwide policy to ensure that this stuff is delivered and rolled out at pace? That ended up being a very wide-ranging question, so feel free to answer in parts.
I think in answer to the... Sorry, Lee.
No, you go, Rachel. Go.
I think in answer to you, the second bit, I think the very unfortunate reality is that unless there are policies in place, these things don't happen. And I think we want to get to a point where, things like decarbonisation, things like the retrofit agenda is taken as seriously as health and safety. And again, kind of to get that to the point it is today, there had to be policies put in place and there had to be penalties for not following certain guidelines. And so I think that it probably will, we will need to mandate things for these things to actually happen, as I think, it has just been whatever, if it was the heat pump grant, then it was heat pumps. If it was another focus, and it would be that. It's not necessarily the best solution. It's whatever is being mandated or whatever grants are available at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing to say about policy, though, is I would say that it needs to focus on what outcomes it's trying to achieve rather than prescriptive methods for how they are delivered, because I don't think policy people can ever keep up with the pace that we have. So if you look at the current policies that are, Michelle will know, for the PAS policies, the 2035 and the domestic properties, they're fairly loose. You could tick box them if you wanted to. I'm sure Michelle and everyone in her team do us a much better job than is prescribed in that standard, because it's not cutting edge. It's took a long time to go through government. So I think if it was focused on an energy use intensity in buildings, so it says the outcome of this retrofit needs to be X, then that would be a better way to drive the agenda. But I agree with Rachel, until everyone set net zero targets, nothing happened at all.
I definitely agree that on the point about not prescribing certain technologies. I think we will have all seen that there's been a series of boom and bust government policies that have been a year long that just haven't worked, and actually they don't work because the supply chain isn't ready. The government has said they want something like 600,000 heat pumps installed every year by, I think, 2026. That's just not going to happen at the moment with the skills and the supply chain, because that investment isn't happening. To answer those two questions about holistic and prescribed, definitely I think a holistic approach is needed, one that considers carbon impact alongside the social impact and the economic impact. I think unless you address the economics, it's not going to happen, both from the perspective of getting funding. The business case has to work, otherwise no one's going to fund it, and projects won't happen without funding. But also, if you're talking to social housing residents or homeowners or C&I landlords, if they're not able to see the savings and see the financial case, they're not going to do it. So it needs to be a joined up approach, and housing needs to also flow into decarbonising our transport and all other areas of life, essentially. In terms of the government policies prescribing, I definitely think legislation is a huge driver, and is kind of the initial spark. However, I actually think there's a huge role to play from the insurance and finance sectors because of the transitional risk of climate change. So at the moment, there's been a recent policy done about a year ago on insurers' risk, and it was something like 30% of insurers' assets will be wiped out if they don't address the risk of climate change. And so actually these financial institutions are realizing that they have a huge need to decarbonize and to basically mitigate the climate crisis. Otherwise, all their assets are going to become worthless.
No,
you still put the root of the problem, right, which is money. So the next problem we've got, which is I mentioned in my presentation, is skills, but the skills won't come until the money comes. So heat pumps is a really good example of that. So we have lots of boiler engineers today. We need lots of heat pump engineers, but we actually need more than one-to-one with government targets. So a heat pump takes much, much longer to install than a traditional boiler. So from a skills point of view, we need more than one-to-one, and the government's targets are again saying we need more than one-to-one to ramp up that work and that install process. But that won't come till the money comes.
Okay, with that, something that you just touched on there, Michelle, but I would be keen to get the wider views. We've had a question coming in about how confident are the panelists that retrofit clients will use productivity-based techniques and practice such as digital to move more effectively to scale rather than focus on cost and compliance, which is where they seem to be largely focused at the moment. And Michelle, you've definitely, maybe I'll go to you in the first instance because you've been speaking about like that balancing act quite a bit, but I'd be quite keen to get Rachel and Lee's views on that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you just clarify that question? Was it how do you balance cost effectiveness with?
It's sort of like how confident are you that there is client appetite to see the more efficient ways that they could roll retrofit out at scale if they're not necessarily upfront as cost effective? Because digitalization and new processes always have some sort of upfront costs that maybe clients aren't so keen on, even if there are savings down the track.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think this is where the aggregation point comes in. So in the social housing sector, for example, we talk to local authorities and landlords who have 50,000, 100,000 properties on their books, and actually they can take that long-term view, and they are already taking that long-term view of what is our 30-year strategy for protecting our building stock and taking care of our residents. So I actually think that initial trade-off between upfront cost potentially on some solutions versus longer term savings is something that the social housing sector is able to think about more so than others, just because of it, its very nature of having to need a long-term view. And I think the social housing industry might very well be going first on that, and then other industries will follow. But I think if it is upfront cost versus long-term savings, then it depends how well you can visualize, quantify, and guarantee those long-term savings. That will determine whether people will be happy to do kind of cost upfront. Yeah, that's kind of my answer.
No worries. Rachel, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I do. So I think I would challenge the perception that using digital techniques is always more expensive than manual. I would almost argue the opposite. And using digital products and data effectively makes the process more efficient and less costly. Not the other way around. Obviously, if you're planning on building digital twin models of every building, then yes. But if you are actually just automating manual calculations that engineers would be doing anyway, you know, a piece of code can do 100 buildings in the same time. One engineer could do one, which then leaves the engineer just to do the kind of the validation, the review at the end, and it actually makes the whole process quicker and more cost effective. So I don't think it's. I think if we portray that to clients, then to me they would have appetite because actually it's a cost saving, and not an additional cost.
Absolutely. Lee, did you have any additional
Yeah,
thoughts?
no, I think I echo what Rachel said. Human in the loop design rather than human led design is definitely the way to go. It will make it cheaper. It will make it more efficient. I worry that building owners in the commercial sector still think short term. It's very difficult to retrofit a smart building as opposed to building a smart building. So I think that digital legacy we talked about is stuttering at the moment because people can't see the long-term vision of what digital looks like, how it benefits you in the future, how it helps society. And I kind of agree with whoever asked the question. I think we're in that perception moment where it seems like it's more expensive and more difficult, but actually it's probably not.
Okay, so this is one for me, just because while I have you guys here, I would be keen to get your thoughts. So looking ahead, looking 12 to 18 months from now, where would you want to have seen this agenda progress? So if we're talking about all these innovative ways that people are working to try and contribute to our net zero push, specifically through retrofit, how much progress would you want to see? Are there any particular innovations that you would have liked to see come along? How would you sort of like to have seen things change?
Who wants to start? Should I? Go on, Michelle, you go first.
Well, I think within the next 18 months, proving the case for the industry for retrofits is going to be key. I think there's already been a lot of pilots done on retrofits where people have retrofitted, 10 houses, 30 houses, sometimes, slightly more than that, about 100. But we need to have agreement on a really huge project that shows that scale can happen. And that needs to happen across all sectors. I also think there needs to be more on the consumer side. So, a lot of banks are beginning to do green mortgages and green lending, which is great. However, there needs to be more of a push for that in public perception. I think retrofit has become top of the agenda with the energy bill crisis, but I think banks and lenders can definitely do more to push green lending and encouraging people to retrofit themselves. So I think yeah, more green lending products in the consumer market, and then in the social housing and C&I markets, the delivery of at scale projects, it will be key.
Absolutely. Lee, Rachel?
So I think I hope we're standing on the precipice of a massive change with AI. So as AI becomes more embedded in people's lives, I hope in the next 18 months there are things I can't even think about yet where AI reaches into the digital world of construction and helps us out. I'm a firm believer in it. I don't think it's going to take over the world and kill us all with robots. I think it's got a very narrow focus. It's very good at doing certain things like regression or clustering, stuff that we're not very good at, and that can do very well. So I hope there's a significant breakthrough product, something like ChatGPT in the construction industry that allows us to take a massive leap forward.
Perfect. And Rachel?
Yeah, I think I echo what Lee said. I think in the next 18 months, I hope it does start just becoming business as usual. And these digital solutions are just part of the way that we work.
Absolutely brilliant. Just because I've seen this come in a couple of times, I will answer it quickly for our audience. Yes, you'll be able to watch this. If you think you have a colleague who would like to watch it, you can share it. It'll just be the same link that you've joined today, but just give us half an hour once this wraps up. And then you can watch it all over again and take it all in again. So one of the other questions that we've had come in is about fabric first approach and how, what sort of different tools and technologies people should be using to make the most of a fabric first approach. Does anyone have any particular thoughts on that?
No.
Rachel, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the way that we approach fabric first, and also at the moment with PAS 2038, it's also fix it first, not fabric first. So look to actually potentially remove bad retrofit that was done previously before you then retrofit over that. Kind of, draft proofing and making sure the envelope of the building is to a certain standard before you then take the fabric approach. And then with fabric first, it's using available calculations to then reduce the heat consumption of the building before you then look at solutions such as air source heat pumps. So in all of the calculations that we do, we take that approach and we look at the existing U values of buildings. We look at the potential to improve those U values through different installation methods, obviously taking into account things like thermal bridging, interstitial condensation, when we do those calculations, to then estimate what can feasibly be achieved, and then what the impact is on the subsequent interventions, as I said, such as a low carbon heat system.
Brilliant. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yes, yeah. I guess I'm the point about fabric first and what tools to use. I guess I don't see fabric first. The approach to understanding how fabric first works and whether it is technically and financially viable. I don't think the approach needs to be different to the approach used for any other assessing any other technology to implement in the home. I think from my perspective, it's all about standardizing that assessment and being technology agnostic. So analyzing all the different types of technology you could implement into a home. So, from heat pumps and solar panels to insulation, double glazing, etc., and understanding what works best for that particular home. I think all these different approaches, fabric first, solar first. I think Rachel said fit for something first. They're all fix. Yeah, great, thanks. They're all approaches we're imposing from our own biases, as opposed to taking a step back and looking objectively at what might have the biggest carbon and economic impact.
Cool. And we've had just a couple of questions coming in about the PAS standards. So I know, Lee, you briefly mentioned PAS 2035, and there was also PAS 30, and then Rachel, did you mention PAS 2038? So I think people have been sort of asking about the technological tie-in to making sure that they're meeting these standards and how important important those, obviously there's some that are required, but how significant they are and whether they are actually the levels that people should be working to, or should people be trying to exceed those?
No, they should be.
So how do they go about doing that? Sorry, again, I've just tried to amalgamate a couple there.
They should be the base level, right? They should be the level you definitely don't go below. I think there's a huge space above them to work into and innovating. The risk in the industry is that people put in all of their tenders, please, comply with standard X, and then we tick that box, and it becomes a negative rather than a positive.
So yeah, not making it a checkbox exercise to hit those criteria. Okay, cool. We've covered a lot of ground, which I'm very conscious of. So something that I always try to do at the end of the sessions is sort of ask each of the speakers to sort of give their one or two, but if it runs to three, because we've covered a lot of ground, I'll give you that, one or two big takeaways that they want the audience to sort of leave with at top of mind, their big considerations on the topic. I'll give you a second, just have a think about it while I just run through some housekeeping that we need to do before we wrap up. We'd just love to thank, in the first instance, Atkins for sponsoring this session. We wouldn't have been able to do it without their support, so really grateful for that. We'd also just love to thank the audience for all the questions that have come through, and to anybody whose question I didn't get to, I apologise. And of course, thank you to the speakers. I'll thank you again once you've answered, but it's been such a great session. The time's really gotten away from me. So I will now just ask you guys if you had any of those, sort of big thoughts that people should be keeping top of mind as they leave the session. Let's go the same order we've kicked things off in. So Michelle, you can go first.
Great, thanks. My key points would be to address the climate crisis as urgently and as quickly as we need to. We need to reach scale. To be able to reach scale, we need to manage the risk of underperformance of retrofits. And to do that, we need standardization. And standardization comes back to using digital solutions to standardize the way buildings are assessed, to standardize the way their risk is analyzed, and to standardize the way we present projects to funders and landlords and residents.
Brilliant. Lee?
So I think the thing I would say is probably where we stand today with the technology we have and the business cases we can make, we can probably get to 80% of net zero in the built environment fairly easily, just doing things well, doing things standard, doing things within a commercial framework. There is probably 20% of niche problem nightmares that we need to innovate for coming forward, but I think we should get on the boat and get the 80% up because it's within reach.
Brilliant. And Rachel?
I think my key takeaways on how digital can support the retrofit agenda is to really think about any opportunity to digitize, to automate, to improve, and to really, going back to the question that was asked earlier, challenge the perception that it is less cost effective, because there are massive cost savings that can be gained from using automation, from digitizing, and that I think we should all work together to make this business as usual and the way that we work going forward. And sorry, one final thing, going back to the point about kind of data sharing, open source data, learning from each other, I think again is a really key point to working together to solve this solution that is a problem we all have.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate all your expertise. So a huge thank you to Rachel, Michelle and Lee for their time today and their time in preparing for today's session. We really, really appreciate it. I know that I've been inspired. We've had some great questions coming through, so thanks again to the audience. We had 2 earlier sessions today, which are both now available on demand. You can find them on building design, or housing today. And if you're particularly keen on the net zero stuff, you should also check out our Net Zero Live conference. That program's now live. You can register for those sessions and it's happening next month. It's virtual as well. So pop that one in the diary. Definitely worth checking out. That's it from us today. So thank you.